I've been a hotel night watchman for 2 years. As you can imagine, I've witnessed strange things during my rounds on the floors. The hotel where I work doesn't have any particular reputation, except that it's appreciated for its good value rooms, or the friendliness of the staff. Yet, things happen there at night, things that I still can't explain to this day. When I began training, the night watchman, who was to turn over the role to me later, accompanied me. His name was Charles. According to Charles, the job was exhausting. He told me that he no longer enjoyed this position because of the many difficulties, like always having to stay up late or barely seeing his loved ones. I understand him now, since after only a year, I was already starting to feel that way. The nights aren't particularly difficult. You just have to wander around the floors from time to time, check if the guests aren't smoking in their rooms, prepare the breakfasts, and sometimes do a bit of cleaning. He briefed me well during training, only telling me about the minor formalities on the third day. He called the strange nightly occurrences by that name. He began sharing about Madame Drémur, a woman in her 70s, who frequently stayed at the hotel and had a unique routine. Around 3 in the morning, she would come down to smoke her cigarette while her husband was sleeping. Charles then explained to me that Madame Drémur often chatted with the night watchman before going back up to her room. She would tell him some disturbing things. Often, Mrs. Drémur would talk about voices she claimed to have heard coming from the first floor. This often happened to her when staying on the second floor, but never when sleeping on the first floor, according to her. Charles initially believed the lady's old age caused everything, until he heard voices himself. As Mrs. Drémur was coming down the last steps, Elise Drémur supposedly smiled at her at that moment and said, "You see, I'm not crazy." I asked if the noise was from customers talking too loudly on the first floor, to which he replied that it was impossible, because at that time, the first floor wasn't rented. Charles continued and told me the following story. I was both excited to hear more, but also very worried. I think at that moment, I didn't really realize that this hotel was going to be my future workplace. Charles went on, and this time told me about the shadow of the boiler. Every night, the night watchman has to go check the boilers to see if the temperatures are right, or to check if there are any leaks. Charles hated it, and the watchman before him did too. He said that one night, while going down to the basement and boilers, he felt followed. After turning around many times, he finally reached the room where the boiler was, and for the first time, decided to close the door behind him. He took the temperature readings, checked if all was well, then put away his notebook before returning to the door. Only this last one wouldn't open anymore. He started to panic, pulling on the handle with all his strength, but nothing. The door didn't move an inch. He then took out his phone and was about to call his boss when a noise behind him caught his attention. His heart froze when he saw what was in the corner of the room, just to the right of the boiler. It was a human-shaped shadow standing in the darkest corner of the room. He wondered if his eyes deceived him, but fear overwhelmed him. As he started to dial his boss's number, his hands trembling, the shadow moved. It was slowly moving toward him. The lights started acting up and flickered as if the bulbs were about to explode. He saw a hand and long black fingers forming right in front of him. Charles screamed and everything stopped instantly. The bulbs stopped buzzing. The door behind him opened with a click and the shadow had completely disappeared. Charles insisted I would likely encounter it too, as was the case for all previous watchmen. He continued his little formalities with the story of the midnight passerby. This story is particularly strange, and like the shadow of the boiler, the former watchmen have already dealt with him. It is said to be a man who rings the intercom once a month. The midnight passerby, as his name suggests, only rings exactly at midnight. According to Charles, he stands perfectly straight in front of the intercom and simply asks, "Good evening, are there any rooms available?" However, every time the midnight passerby comes to ring, the hotel is fully booked. Charles told me his face was always hidden by the shadow of his hat, never visible. I then asked if he had ever let him in, despite the hotel being fully booked, each time, and he told me that it had only happened to him once. That night, Charles was tired and automatically pressed the airlock switch to let him in, just as the intercom rang. He looked to see who was about to come in, and there he saw the midnight passerby waiting in front of the entrance airlock. Charles immediately blocked the doors and wondered how that man could have moved so quickly to the entrance. The midnight passerby stayed in front of the door, and after a moment, he started doing something really strange. He placed both his hands on the glass of the airlock and leaned forward slightly. That's when Charles noticed that only one thing was visible on his face at that moment, his smile. In a panic, Charles made sure his doors were locked tight. Once he had done that, he looked up toward the airlock, but the man had disappeared. Since then, the midnight passerby came monthly, but Charles never opened the door for him again. The little formalities he told me about were fascinating, but they really made me uncomfortable. The knowledge that I would become a night watchman at that hotel in a month only intensified my unease. Charles noticed my disappointed look and asked if he could continue. I then told him yes, as I wanted to know everything going on in that hotel before working there. He continued and told me about the Red Café. Night watchmen are generally big coffee addicts and anything that can give them a good boost. Charles, like others, consumed a lot of it during his nights. He said he'd sometimes drink around 10 coffees in a single night, and that, when that happened, a strange coffee could appear if he poured himself one more cup. A red-colored coffee. The coffee comes from the breakfast machine and the bean is completely normal. Nothing explains the strange color of this last one, and even less the smell, because yes, according to Charles, the smell is metallic and similar to human blood. He told me that every time he poured it down the sink, he noticed how thick the substance was. He never drank a sip of that coffee. For him, it was a kind of bad omen warning him not to have coffee again. He then told me that the night watchman before him, Wilson, had very often dealt with that strange coffee. And only after 1 or 2 cups, Charles concluded that it was a warning when he learned that Wilson had heart problems. The bathroom in room 116 is probably the scariest story he ever told me. According to guests, that bathroom always has a problem. Plumbing problems, recurring smells coming from the shower drain, the heater not working anymore, and so on. But those aren't the scariest stories about that bathroom. Charles, during his rounds, would often hear a woman's voice coming from that room. And that happened even when it wasn't rented. Sometimes the woman would even start singing, which really intrigued Charles. So, one evening, he decided to open the room to check if the voices were really coming from there. Obviously, at that moment, it wasn't rented. He then unlocked the door and listened carefully. The singing was quieter, but still present. Charles quickly noticed that it was coming from the bathroom. He then opened the door and noticed steam escaping from behind the shower curtain. The singing was even quieter, but still present. It was when Charles said, "Is someone there?" that the singing suddenly stopped. Charles kept looking toward the curtain. It was moving strangely, as if something was pushing from behind it. And that was the case, because after that, Charles noticed that the shape pushing against the curtain was a face. At that moment, the woman's singing started again, but in a more macabre way, louder, more threatening. Charles left the room quickly and closed the door behind him, and he never set foot in it again for the rest of his career. The ghost receptionist is by far the most disturbing story he ever told me. Charles says it always happens before midnight. The hotel night watchman's shift is from 9 post-meridium to 7 ante-meridium. I never would have thought that strange things could happen between 9 p.m. and midnight. Yet that was the case. Charles told me that sometimes customers left strange reviews about the hotel on various booking sites. They could be customers from Booking, Expedia, or others. The customers mentioned the night watchman with long white hair who is not very friendly and cold. According to them, he just hands over the keys without speaking, looking the customer in the eyes in a very cold way. However, no such night watchman exists among the hotel staff. The mentioned dates were sometimes days when Charles was at work. He then told me that this strange receptionist would only give the keys to the guest when he was forced to step away. He went on with some strange anecdotes, like chairs that would put themselves up on the tables when his back was turned, or lights that would turn on and off by themselves without anyone touching the switches. He finished his little formalities by telling the story of room 146. The hotel has 3 floors. On the first floor, the rooms range from 102 to 138, and room 146 has never been mentioned. Yet quite a few guests came to report that they heard noise on the first floor coming from that very room. Charles would then explain to them that this room didn't exist in the hotel. Usually the guests were unsure and would ask Charles to accompany them up to the floor. To show him he was wrong, Charles told me that they all had the same reaction. With things like, "I don't understand. I could have sworn there was a door right here," or even, "I swear I saw a door with the number 146 on it." Charles was used to this and made it a routine to always accompany guests to their rooms, and to show them that room 146 didn't exist. Charles kept describing the odd occurrences related to that room. The most troubling fact is likely the incoming reservations, numbering 146. When we receive a reservation, it's up to the hotel staff to assign it a room number. Everything is done manually, yet sometimes a reservation comes in and room 146 is assigned to it automatically. Management is aware of this strange bug and thinks it's just a simple computer error. So, the night staff are instructed to delete the reservation without asking any questions. After the training, I started working the following month. Everything that Charles had told me was real. I couldn't verify the fact about Madame Drémur because she died a month after my training. The Red Café, the shadow of the boiler, the midnight passerby, room 146, the bathroom of 116, the ghost receptionist. Everything was true. From the first year, I took precautions and learned to handle these various setbacks in my own way. For example, I never answered the intercom when the midnight passerby rang. I noticed that by ignoring him, he would eventually get tired after the 3rd ring and decide to leave on his own. I was able to observe the phantom receptionist twice while I was working. After 6 months, new cameras were installed at the hotel and a touchscreen tablet was made available for the night watchman. The hotel has 6 cameras on it. And because of that, I was able to observe the white-haired receptionist twice. The first time, I saw him give keys to the guest and do nothing for several minutes. The second time, I saw him turn toward the camera and stare at the lens for at least 30 minutes. If you want my opinion, I think he's harmless. But when I sense his presence, I pretend nothing's happening. You never know. I still don't know what his real intentions are. As for the shadow by the boiler, I always leave a wooden wedge to keep the door open. Sometimes I'd glimpse it from the corner of my eye. When that happened, I'd ignore it and return later at night. For the red coffee, I did like all the other night watchmen and stopped serving myself when I came across him. Like Charles, I think this is a warning. Since caffeine is harmful to the heart, no other explanations were necessary. I often hear the famous songs from room 116, and even though they give me chills every time, I've decided to ignore them. I've never seen the bathroom in room 116 since starting this job. I have no plans to visit it for the remainder of my career. I don't know what's in that bathroom, but frankly, I'm not interested in knowing. Now comes room 146. I often get reports from clients about this room. People often report hearing crying, screams, or sometimes the cries of babies. Unlike Charles, I preferred not to accompany the clients to show them that the room didn't exist. I tell them I'll check and quiet the noises. The noises always stop when I go downstairs. I've never seen the door to room 146, no matter what. I found an explanation for all reservations involving the number 146 myself. Contrary to what management thought, it's not a computer error. The guests who were assigned this room number all have one thing in common. They never showed up at the hotel. It was during my 3rd week of work that I understood why this room, 146, was assigned to them. I quickly realized nothing happens by chance when I saw my first reservation with that number. As I explained to you, Madame Drémur, a regular guest at the hotel, passed away the month after my training. However, a reservation had come in the week of her death, 2 days before she passed away from a heart attack. A reservation for Elise Drémur showed up in the hotel system. When I saw that room 146 was assigned to her, I quickly realized that this room had a special power to prevent the death of certain people. Every time, the person who saw this room assigned in the software dies in the days that follow. My hotel is full of many other mysteries, and from what I've heard, many night porters in different hotels have similar experiences. And so, because of that, I have only one piece of advice to give you. If you want to be a night watchman, hang in there. The job isn't easy, that's for sure. But the small advantage is that no two nights are the same.